stormwater, it becomes excessive when we develop the land. And that's the nature of how we live. You know, this building, that pavement all around us creates stormwater that runs off more than native land. So we have excess water. It carries things like nitrogen, bacteria, and sediment. These are the pollutants we're interested in. But we can build infrastructure that alleviates that. And so that's the future for us, is to keep trying to do a better job. Habitat's a really key feature that people don't think about, and neighborhoods can lead the way, which is kind of the theme today. This is borrowed from the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program. This shows a whole array of creatures that live in different salinities, and salt water moves in and out of the watersheds. The same thing happens here. This is just the image I had for you. When you get the recipe right, mixing fresh and salt water, the right amount in the right place, and you have a habitat, you get an abundance of life. And that's natural here. Florida is a very, very abundant place. Who's from Florida? Who's from Sarasota? Anybody?
You born and raised here?
So tell me, what's the most fish you ever caught? Like in a day?
Oh my gosh, we would catch 50, 100.
50 or 100 fish?
As many as until you got tired and wanted to go
Not
home.
very long ago, this was a place where people got 100 fish. It was different. There was just this tremendous abundance. Downtown Sarasota had an oyster house on the dock. You see it in the old pictures. Oysters were a big thing. Even now we have a lot of life. People who are natives will tell you the fiddler crabs lined the bays and the creeks, and they actually made a racket with all their clicking and clacking. Sounds crazy. I've seen 10,000 mullet in one school, you know, and I've only lived here 25 years. So it's a place that it's abundant. It's naturally abundant here, and it's not what it was. Ask the locals.
When you look to the history of Sarasota, in the 1910s, this community was a haven for fishermen. It drew people from all over the United States and Europe to come to fish in Sarasota Bay. That's the way Powell Crossley came here. That's the way Owen Burns came here.
Yeah, there's just so many people. Most people aren't from here, so we have to learn from those people who were here. And what I think is we have to look at the past, and it's not distant past, and say that helps us say what the future should be. That's why I bring this up as a fundamental idea. We can give up on abundance, but I'm not for it. Here's a more discussion about runoff. This is a picture of the Myakka River State Park. It's 25,000 acres. When it rains out there, not like during dry season, you don't really get runoff. It mostly pools up, it soaks into the ground, the plants take it up. During wet season, after it's rained for about a month, water starts to sheet flow across the land. So that's a pattern of rain and runoff that is the normal, natural thing here. Even on the coastal areas, it would have been like that. It's flat, most of the water sits and soaks in, recharges the water table. But we can't live there. We have to build a landscape. So here's a picture of an aerial view of Sarasota, and it's like any other place. But what we did is we actually mapped impervious surfaces like roofs and sidewalks and parking lots and roads. And in the mapping feature, when it gets all clustered together like that, it turns bright red. So this is a normal urban landscape. The yellow is places that have some sort of stormwater treatment, like a stormwater pond. And this is just like everywhere in Florida. We built the coast first. We didn't do stormwater ponds or stormwater treatment. A really, really precious bay is right here. So this is a thing where there's room for improvement, because when it rains, water goes in the bay. It's hard on the bay to get fresh water year-round. It'd be better if it was less like that. And here's some of the infrastructure ideas that help with that. This is P.F. Chang's right here in Sarasota. They put in a pervious parking lot. So when it rains there, water soaks between those bricks, beautiful paved brick parking lot, and it soaks into a rock bed underneath. So when you're there as a customer, you won't see puddles. It's actually, as an amenity, it's really nice. No puddles in that parking lot. That's the normal thing with pervious pavement, pervious pavers. On Honore Avenue, there's swale drainage. I really love the way this looks. People vary. Some people would rather see grass, but swales capture water, improve the quality of water, this normal storm water that we have, and as does pervious sidewalk. This is the Englewood CRA, the Community Redevelopment Area. They built pervious sidewalks. And if you go down there on a rainy day, those sidewalks are moist, no puddles, all the pavement around you, the streets and parking lots all have standing water in them. Really nice new infrastructure that works in our favor. Some of the pollutants that we see are bacteria. This is a buddy of mine, John Perry, Poop Fairy. Takes a certain kind of guy to draw stuff like that for our campaign, so I admire that. We also have a thing about nitrogen. We actually estimated that about 5 tons of dog poop is left on the ground every day, based on the licenses and 40% picking it up and how much it weighs and all that sort of stuff. It certainly adds up. And if the water's running off, it's carrying that stuff with it, not good for our bays and creeks. This is to get across the point that if you over-fertilize, it goes to the bays and water bodies that can't use that nitrogen beneficially. And this is from the Southgate community in Sarasota, and this is an area where sediment is building up in Philippi Creek, and they're upset with it, and we're exploring actually cures, sort of treat the disease rather than the symptoms there. We're having a meeting with them pretty soon, and they're pushy about it, which I think is a good thing. John Perry, the Poop Fairy, actually is a great scientist, and he calculated this relationship, and he came out with it this is a comparison of bacteria levels are higher up here, and low impervious, like Mayaca Park, and places with very little pervious surface are over there in the green. And so what this says is that as you pave more and more, and you become more and more an urban place like we live, you're carrying more bacteria into the water with that stormwater runoff. It's not proof. This is data. These are facts, so it's informative. Doesn't mean we have cause and effect, but pretty interesting. I love this stuff. I like nerdy stuff, and I thought that was insightful. Part of wastewater management is septic systems, and septic systems have probably done more for public health than any other system around the world, but if they're not built right, or if they're broken, or if they're crowded together, or they're too close to a water body, or too deep in the water table, they're not ideal. So we have a lot of septic systems. It's 200 gallons a day, that adds up. And they need to be right if we're going to have them. This is some of the Philippi Creek septic system replacement program in the Philippi Creek watershed. That's the red outline. And the green stuff is where the septic systems are out and there's central sewer in those areas. Red is work in progress. And this is a little old, and yellow is not programmed yet. But there also were about 31 or 32 little wastewater plants for like a restaurant or a trailer park that were in this watershed that also came out in this process. That ends up being 9 million gallons a day of wastewater that doesn't go underground in our yards and your businesses and stuff like that. That adds up. That's a lot every day. So I think modern infrastructure, big deal in getting clean water. I like habitat. I'm really interested in habitat. This is a picture of Alligator Creek between 41 and Jacaranda Boulevard. And so here's the 1948 picture. This is the exact same, this is the same thing, the same layout. But in the old times, and you can see not much was going on in Venice. This same path, this is Alligator Creek, we turned it into a canal, which is unfortunate, but that's what normally happens. It happens a lot. But here it was like this big, wide floodplain. This was part of how abundance works. If you have a floodplain, you're feeding all those fish in there, and that's nature at its best. What's interesting is some of this is owned by the county, so perhaps there's a project there to kind of build some more habitat and take out some of the canal thing. Just an idea. But we're looking at it in other places. We've been working with Moat quite a bit, and there's been a lot of snook studies in Sarasota, and a lot of snook, they've raised snook and they've released them in our creeks. And Dr. Ken Lieber leads a team doing this stuff, and I was talking to him recently. He said 50% of the snook depend on the tidal creeks to survive. I didn't know that. You sort of know there's snook up in the creeks. The tidal creeks are full of snook. It's amazing how many are in there. Don't go catch them all. I want to have snook. But they showed me some data just this week. South Creek, which is where Oscar Scherer Park is, has 3 times more snook than Philippi Creek. And they said that's because the habitat is still there. Snook's important to us. It's not a cold weather fish. It only lives in this part of the world. It's a warm weather fish, big destination fishery for our economy. I love bay scallops. Here's some girls who are out, they have a scallop in their hand, they're squirting at it. This was I think the first scallop search about 5 years ago. And this is from Bass Labs down in Englewood. Back in 1936, this scientist said, we found a lot of bay scallops. I got 200 in 1 hour, picking them up with my feet. Have you ever been scalloping? That's not what happens.
We used to do it in the wash tubs. You just tied a little rope and floated them behind you and just picked them up as you walked.
Well,
Filled the wash tubs.
it's not like that now. If you go up to, Homosassa, different places, you look all day to fill up.
Yes, a snorkel for them up there.
Yeah.
Here we just walk in water this deep.
Can you hear what he said? He could fill wash tubs walking in shallow water in Sarasota Bay. That's what people tell me. Up to about the 70s.
Yeah.
So that was a normal summertime activity here until just a few decades ago. Crazy that it's not that way now. And part of that is seagrass habitat. We've had a decline in seagrass habitat over the years, and it's getting better. Something that our team does is we work with the Water Management District to map seagrass. You may have heard Tampa Bay just had documented a big seagrass recovery up there. Sarasota Bay is doing well. We're not all meeting targets, but we're doing pretty well. We also have staff and volunteers mapping things like species, just so we are. Seagrass is really important to the aquatic environment. We want to keep an eye on it. Down in Englewood, they have discovered this little pond, this pond right here. Have you heard about the Lemon Bay Conservancy's Wildflower Preserve? A couple, 3 years ago, I was down here. Somebody called me up and says, you got to go see what these guys are doing. They're tagging tarpon. And they took a little boat out in this and brought one net, wrapped it around, pulled it in. 250 tarpon, a foot long in that net, one snook and nothing else. And so Aaron Adams from Boat was there, and he said, do you have any questions? I said, yeah, how many of these are there? He said, this is the first one that's ever been found, ever, was the first one. So a little pond like that, with mangroves around it, is critical tarpon habitat, and we didn't know it until 3 years ago. Who knew? So they're doing DNA tagging. The guy working there is the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Boca Grande, Chamber of Commerce. Because tarpon is so important to the economy in Southwest Florida, especially in Boca. So he's in there with the waders on, doing DNA tests, tagging all the tarpon. That one is bigger than the ones I saw, a lot bigger. But that was interesting. He said they still don't know where they spawn. They spawn offshore, but they don't know. It's science that's being discovered right here in our neighborhood. South Venice Civic Association, about 3 years ago or so, they said, we're unhappy with the way the canals in our neighborhood are being handled. And we come in and we mow and we dig out the muck and this is long arm mowing, normal business practice for stormwater utilities. But they said, we want it to be nice. We want life in this water body. So they've been negotiating with the county to do a restoration project in these canal cuts. And we're real close to bidding a construction project, and we've been working with them, and it's been a real joy. This is a game changer for me, because they are people who get out there and they work. There's this Commissioner Mason here. They've had any number of people go down and visit with them. Steve should be in this picture somewhere. I don't know if I have you in these, Steve.
Mr. Fox.
Yeah, Harrison Fox, great guy. He's got fire. He wants to make things happen. So the idea is that a waterway doesn't have to be just a nasty thing that you shun. It could be a thing that you love, that it has life in it, that crabs swim through it. It's not just a mucky place that is treated like a conveyance only. Amazing people, and what they started has now spread to other communities. It's a big change. Southgate, right here in Sarasota, they started doing paddle cleanups. They got involved in, actually, a baby manatee got trapped out there in between some of the sandbars, and they went to Lowry Park Zoo and was rehabilitated. They recognize that Philippi Creek is full of life, and they actually sell weddings. Their community center, the catchphrase is on the banks of beautiful Philippi Creek. So people get married under an oak tree at their community center. It's a Victor Lundy building. And that sort of funds their community association. So that was interesting. They're still upset with us because there's still sediment coming downstream. There's an old dam there. And so we're working. We have a meeting with them in, I think, 2 weeks. Up in Pinecraft, this is my buddy Fred Hirschberger. He fishes for snook and kayaks Philippi Creek a couple times a week for the last 10 years. And he's been, it's hard to break into that community, but he says he's speaking for other people. They're really interested in having walking bridges over Philippi Creek because they're a walking, biking community. They're kind of natural people. And he always tells me, don't you tear down that vegetation. Don't you dredge this thing out. This is where their habitat is. In Venice Gardens, I'm kind of going back and forth. They have a very green lake. It's a 68-acre lake, and they're saying, this, when you're on the street, the neighborhood looks really different than if you get in a boat and go around the neighborhood in the lake. Because there's docks out there, and there's chickee huts, and that's sort of the fun side of the house. So they're saying, we want this lake to be better, and we actually have a project, an expensive project there to try to improve that lake. But they're doing things themselves. They're asking for what they want. You have to ask. And they have a lot of partnerships. They're working with South Venice, various things in the work. One thing they said, you can't see into the water except about that far. They said there's no fish in this lake. While we were out there doing the cleanup, a bass jumped in the lake, jumped in our canoe, and Ashley grabbed it real quick and handed me her camera and said, take my picture. So we said, see, there are bass in that lake, which we kind of knew anyway, but it was surprising. Riverview High School is using Philippi Creek as a science curriculum thing, where they're going out there and they're replanting their shoreline and native plants. They have a walkway. It's a really amazing school. They're actually looking at building these little backpack submarines you can get them for like $900. It's a kit that the engineering students would build. They have an aquaculture facility there. I don't know if you've heard that. It's amazing. They have 2 teachers of the year involved in the science curriculum there. Really interesting school. And they're doing cleanups and using the creek as their part of their educational process. There's Florida House, and I'm going to have to keep moving, so you've probably heard of Florida House. Very complex place, but they're also looking at stormwater education. They're along with solar and habitat stuff, and they're complicated. They have a lot of stuff going on. Up at Bobby Jones Golf Course, this was actually an outgrowth of South Venice Civic Association again. The friends of Bobby Jones came down to the South Venice meetings and said, well, we have canals through the golf course. Shouldn't they be revitalized and be prettier than the kind of industrial look that they have? They're sometimes overgrown. And one thing led to another. Now the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program's putting it in their 5-year restoration plan. The city Public Works Director, Doug Jeffcoat, put in for Restore Act money, well-spent money, to try to do a restoration project there. So it's kind of snowballing, and they're saying, can we add value to the course by having great-looking, healthy water bodies? And there's no clear path to this, but we're trying to learn together. Friends of Red Bug Slough Preserve down around Clark and Geneva, there's restoration there, and they're sort of a friend of Philippi Creek. There's a big bird rookery. If you've ever been down to Geneva and Clark and you look south, you know where that big power station thing is? There's a lake you can barely see in there, but 1,000 birds will roost on that island at night. If you happen to go by, you'll see a flock of 100 birds coming in for a landing. And a lot of people don't know, it's right there by a busy road. So I'm shifting gears now. This is still on the theme of there's a lot of runoff and we need to learn how to manage it. You've heard of the Donna Bay project, and it's a story about it was a drainage improvement, which is what all these things are, drainage improvements. So back in the, I guess, 50s, 60s, this was the size of a watershed. This is Venice Inlet. Here's the city of Venice. And there was a watershed that came in through Shackett Creek and into Donna Bay, a little teeny bay, and the whole watershed was about that big. So the contributing water wasn't a lot. But for agricultural purposes, the canal was dug all the way into Manatee County. So now this is the watershed. And the reason the digging stopped is that the people in Donna Bay went to the county commission back in the 60s, I think it was, and said, whatever you're doing, you've got to stop it. Our bay is in trouble. And they stopped the project, but it had gone pretty far. This used to drain to the Mayaca River.
Is that frequently the area by Venice?
Wait a minute, let me bring the microphone to you.
Frequently the water outside of Venice Inlet is polluted and the beach right there has to be shut down. What is the cause?
That's a good question. We actually have a whole initiative to track those things down, and it's tough to figure out. Unfortunately, and this is not the answer, if there's a pollution problem, we absolutely want to track it down no matter what it takes. But a lot of times what we see is that though there's elevated bacteria levels on the beach during real high and low tides and during turbulent weather, and sometimes it's things like birds. But we actually have a rapid response team for the last 3 or 4 years that when we first hear word that we might be not passing bacteria, it's a beach advisory. We send people out and they look in every stormwater pipe, check to make sure there's no wastewater discharges. And over the 3.5 years or so, we've yet to find a pollution source as the cause. And there are some near misses that you only hear about it when there's an advisory. That's after the second sample fails, but we do that after the first sample. Because beaches are precious, to us. We're a beach community. Even if you and I don't go, it's a major driver.
It's almost if you look at the color of the water, it's almost teak color going through there.
That doesn't mean it's polluted, though. The Micah River is a tea color, too. And that's a wetland-influenced, typical watershed that's mostly dominated by wetlands. It'll be dark brown like that. And it is tea, literally. Right. So the funny thing, if you've been there, you can actually stand with 1 foot in brown water and 1 foot in clear Gulf-type water. It's the nature of it. But I think it will be less if we had this watershed doing something else. Yes.
You said most of the closings were not attributed to pollution. What were they attributed to?
Oh, I guess I didn't finish that sentence. Bacteria live in warm, wet environments, so they will live in soil and sediment. And so if you churn up the sediment, it increases the amount that's in the water.
Not a sediment.
It's not the source, it's a reservoir. So for example, we just drafted a press release last week and they were saying, you know what rack is? Where there's a bunch of like seaweed and stuff on the beach. And the first draft they said, that's the source of the bacteria. And I said, no, it's not the source. It's a place where bacteria persists. So birds walk along and they're pecking at things and they poop in the brack. It's not the source, but it lives there. And this has been evolution over the last like 10 years. Scientists used to say, oh, no, it doesn't persist in the sediment, but it absolutely does. And so it's a challenge.
So
The indicator bacteria.
You're saying that the bacteria is in the sediment. And when the sediment runs off,
comes
it's
from
still
us
in there.
and dogs and birds, and it persists. It doesn't disappear when we go away.
But that's still pollution.
It's not a wilderness. Yeah, it's a place where we live and where our pets live and wildlife lives.
No, but that is still a form of pollution. You just said it wasn't pollution.
Well, I guess it's how you think of it. When I think of pollution, I think this is something I have to fix. It's my job to fix this. So if there's a sewage spill, that's something we're supposed to